Australia wants to build the longest bridge in human history, 240 kilometers across one of the most dangerous stretches of ocean on Earth, connecting mainland Australia to the island of Tasmania. The estimated cost, somewhere north of $50 billion. And underneath the route, there's a volcanic hotspot that could erupt within the next few centuries. So how does an idea this insane keep coming back? What makes engineers, politicians, and dreamers keep looking at the Bass Strait and thinking, yeah, we could bridge that? And why, after decades of proposals and studies and debates, has nobody ever broken ground? What went wrong isn't one thing. It's 5 things stacked on top of each other, and any single one of them would be enough to kill the project. But first, let's go back to why anyone would want this bridge in the first place. Tasmania is the only major Australian state you cannot drive to. It sits about 240 kilometers south of Victoria, separated by a stretch of water called the Bass Strait. If you want to get there with your car, you have exactly one option: the Spirit of Tasmania ferry. It's a 9 to 11 hour overnight crossing. Bring a family of 4 with a car and a cabin, and you're looking at $500 to $800 for a one-way trip. Those 2 ferries carry roughly 450,000 passengers per year. They are the lifeline of a state with just over 570,000 people. Think about that. An entire Australian state, completely dependent on 2 aging Finnish-built ships from 2002. And here's the thing. The replacement ferries were supposed to arrive in 2024. They didn't. The new wharf at Devonport was budgeted at $90 million. By 2024, that cost had blown out to $495 million. One of the new ships, Spirit of Tasmania 4, got shipped to Scotland for storage. It sat in the port of Leith at roughly 47,000 Australian dollars per week in berthing fees. Per week, just sitting there, doing nothing. If Australia can't even build a new ferry wharf on budget, what makes anyone think they could build the longest bridge in human history? But people keep proposing it because the idea of a fixed link, a bridge or tunnel that would let you drive from Melbourne to Hobart in under 4 hours, has been floating around since the 1950s, and every decade or so, it comes back. So let's look at what engineers are actually up against. The longest sea crossing bridge in the world right now is the Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge in China. It's 55 kilometers long. It cost $18.8 billion US. It took 9 years to build, and it connects 3 cities with a combined population of over 70 million people in one of the wealthiest economic zones on Earth. The Tasmania Bridge would need to be 240 kilometers long. That's more than 4 times longer than the longest sea bridge ever built. And it would connect Melbourne's 5 million people to Tasmania's 570,000. The economics don't even come close. But distance isn't even the biggest problem. The depth is. Bass Strait has an average depth of 60 meters, but the deepest channel reaches 150 meters. That's a 50-story building underwater. And the seabed isn't clean rock. It's thick sediment, up to 14 kilometers deep in some sections, layered with volcanic basalt from millions of years of eruptions. To build bridge piers here, you'd need to drill through shifting sediment into solid bedrock. Every single pier. Across 240 kilometers of open ocean. Then there's the weather. Bass Strait sits in the roaring 40s. That's a belt of powerful westerly winds that circle the entire southern hemisphere between latitudes 40 and 50 degrees south. There's almost no land to slow them down. These winds build speed across thousands of kilometers of open southern ocean and hit Bass Strait with full force. Storm waves regularly reach 15 meters. Winds exceed 100 kilometers per hour. And this isn't occasional bad weather. This is the baseline. The construction window, days calm enough to actually work, would be limited to maybe a few months per year. Now here's something most people don't know. Bass Strait is actually Australia's most seismically active region. The area averages about 24 recorded earthquakes per year. A magnitude 4 or higher quake hits roughly every 2.5 years. But it gets worse. A volcanic hotspot that produced eruptions around Warrnambool and Mount Gambier in South Australia has been migrating southeast and now sits directly underneath Bass Strait. Mount Gambier erupted just 4,000 years ago. That sounds like a long time until you realize that in geological terms, that's yesterday. And according to geologists, there are undersea volcanic mountains in Bass Strait that are even younger than Mount Gambier. Scientists have warned that renewed volcanic activity beneath the strait could happen within the next few centuries. Building a $50 billion bridge over a potential future volcano is not a risk any government wants to take. And then there's the environmental problem. Bass Strait is a major migration corridor for southern right whales, humpback whales, and blue whales. Tasmania is home to multiple UNESCO World Heritage Sites, with some of the most sensitive ecosystems in the Southern Hemisphere. Any environmental impact assessment would take years, possibly over a decade, and would face fierce opposition. In a country where a single endangered species can halt a highway project, imagine what migrating whales would do to a $50 billion bridge proposal. Let's talk money. Because even if you could solve every engineering problem, even if the weather cooperated and the volcanoes stayed quiet and the whales swam somewhere else, you'd still have to answer one question: who's paying for this? Conservative estimates put this bridge at 50 billion Australian dollars. Some engineering assessments go much higher, 80 billion or more, but let's be generous and stick with 50 billion. For context, the Channel Tunnel between England and France was estimated at 4.8 billion pounds. The final cost, 9.5 billion pounds, nearly double. And that was a 50-kilometer tunnel connecting the United Kingdom to continental Europe. 68 million people on one side, 450 million on the other. Here's what the Channel Tunnel's financial disaster actually looked like. In its first year of operation, the company that built it reported a loss of 925 million pounds. They accumulated 8 billion pounds in debt. They suspended all debt payments in 1995 to avoid bankruptcy. It took until 2007, 13 years after opening, and a complete financial restructuring that wiped out 3.4 billion pounds in debt and reduced shareholder equity to just 13%. Before the tunnel became financially sustainable. And the Channel Tunnel now carries over 20 million passengers per year. The Spirit of Tasmania ferries carry 450,000. Even if every single one of those passengers chose the bridge instead, the toll revenue would never come close to servicing 50 billion in construction debt. You'd need millions of crossings per year. But Tasmania only has 570,000 people total. Where would those millions come from? The Australian government actually studied this. The Freight Logistics Coordination Team, a $1.5 million government-funded study, hired the Smart Infrastructure Group at the University of Wollongong and international engineering firm Parsons Brinckerhoff to evaluate the idea. Their conclusion, the link was neither technically nor economically feasible. They didn't even recommend it as a future possibility. They recommended putting it on the radar screen. That's polite government speak, for this will never happen. But we don't want to say never. Not everyone has given up. Engineers have studied 3 possible routes. The most direct, 240 kilometers straight across the narrowest point. Maximum weather exposure, maximum cost. A second route through King Island on the western side, breaking the crossing into 2 stages. And a third through Flinders Island on the east, using the island chain as stepping stones. All 3 routes would still produce the longest sea crossing ever attempted by a massive margin. The island routes reduce the maximum single span of open water, but they add complexity. You'd need infrastructure on the islands themselves, approach roads, emergency facilities, maintenance depots, and the total distance actually gets longer, not shorter. Some have suggested a tunnel instead, similar to the Channel Tunnel. But the Channel Tunnel is 50 kilometers. The longest undersea tunnel ever built is the Seikan Tunnel in Japan at 54 kilometers. A Bass Strait tunnel would need to be at least 200 kilometers long, nearly 4 times the world record. And unlike the English Channel, which has relatively stable chalk geology, Bass Strait sits on top of thick sedimentary basins, filled with up to 14 kilometers of sediment layered with volcanic rock. Tunnel boring machines would face constantly changing geology, from soft sediment to hard basalt, for hundreds of kilometers, on top of a volcanic hotspot. So let's be honest, will Australia ever build a bridge or tunnel to Tasmania in our lifetime? Almost certainly not. The distance is 4 times longer than any sea crossing ever built. The weather is among the worst on Earth for marine construction. The geology includes active seismic zones and a migrating volcanic hotspot. The cost would exceed $50 billion, likely much more with the kind of overruns that hit every megaproject in history. The population is too small to generate enough traffic to justify the investment, and Australia's own government-funded studies have concluded it is neither technically nor economically feasible. But here's what's fascinating. People said the exact same things about the Channel Tunnel for nearly 200 years. The idea was first proposed in 1802. It was dismissed, mocked, and abandoned repeatedly. Wars killed it, politics killed it, economics killed it, and then in 1994, 192 years after the first proposal, trains started running between England and France. The Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau Bridge was called absurd when it was first proposed in the 1980s. It opened in 2018. By January 2025, over 156,000 people were crossing it in a single day. History tells us that the word impossible has an expiry date. Technology evolves. Economies grow. Political will shift. Tasmania's population won't stay at 570,000 forever. Climate change may reshape transport needs. New tunnel boring technology could change the cost equation entirely. So will Australia build a bridge to Tasmania? Not today, not in 10 years, probably not in 50, but in 100 years, 200 years, never say never. Because if there's one thing we've learned from studying megaprojects around the world, the only truly impossible projects are the ones nobody dreams about anymore. And Australia is still dreaming. And here's the question for you. If money were no object and the engineering existed today, would you support building it? A bridge from Melbourne to Hobart, 4 hours by car. No ferry, no flight, just road. Or is the cost too insane and the risk too high for a state with 500,000 people? Drop your answer below, because somewhere right now, an engineer is looking at a map of Bass Strait and running the numbers, and the next proposal is already being written.